For 3 days the young women endured a punishing discipline, surviving on nothing but water and a single piece of bread at the evening meal. When Sister Clare fainted during chapel prayers on the 2nd day, it was Sister Margaret who revived her with smelling salts. Those who were present would later recall how her thin lips curved in what some described as a smile, a gesture that left more questions than comfort. The atmosphere within the convent grew colder with each passing week, not only because of the brutal Wisconsin winter but also because of the increasingly oppressive rule that hung over them like a heavy fog. One unusually bitter night in January 1858, Sister Mary Collins was startled awake by muffled sounds drifting from the cell adjacent to hers. At first she thought it was simply the wind groaning against the stone walls, but as she strained to listen more closely, she recognized the soft sobbing of Sister Rebecca Murphy. The sound cut through the silence of the convent like a knife. Mary held her breath and pressed her ear to the thin wooden wall. Then she heard it clearly, the sharp whisper of Mother Catherine's voice, low but unmistakable. "You will come with us now. Make any noise and you'll regret it." A chill raced through Mary's body. The sobbing quieted to a stifled whimper, followed by the unmistakable sound of shuffling feet across the floorboards. Then came silence. Mary lay rigid in her narrow bed, her heart pounding so loudly she feared it would betray her wakefulness. She fixed her eyes on the dark rafters above, scarcely daring to breathe. The stillness was broken by the slow, measured creak of floorboards in the corridor outside her cell. One set of footsteps, then another, then a third, 3 distinct presences moving deliberately down the hall. They passed her door, pausing just long enough for 4 to wonder if the handle might turn, then continued onward until the sound faded into the night. Trembling beneath her thin blanket, that night's sounds would haunt Sister Mary's dreams for years to come. A muffled cry quickly silenced, followed by the unmistakable scrape of something heavy being dragged, as though a body were moving not of its own will but by force. She had buried her face in the thin convent pillow, praying for the courage not to look, yet the noises etched themselves permanently into her memory. At dawn, when the bells tolled and the nuns gathered for their morning prayers, Mother Catherine stood before them with the same unyielding composure she always displayed. In her steady voice she announced that Sister Rebecca had been called suddenly to serve at a remote frontier mission in the Dakota Territory. "The native children there require instruction," she said smoothly, "and Sister Rebecca's patience with the orphans has prepared her well for this holy task." No mention was made of farewells, no luggage, no letters, only the pale authority of Catherine's gaze sweeping the refectory, lingering a fraction longer on Sister Mary as though she sensed the fear trembling beneath her habit. "We shall miss her gentle presence," Catherine concluded, "but rejoice in God's purpose for her talents." The other nuns bowed their heads in dutiful silence, though a ripple of unease passed invisibly through their ranks. Sister Mary, however, could scarcely breathe. Her rosary beads clicked audibly in her trembling hands as she forced herself through the familiar Latin prayers, each word like a desperate shield against the images flashing in her mind. She recalled Rebecca's muffled sobs, the whispered threat, the dragging across the floorboards. Her heart thundered with the unspoken question. What had truly happened in the darkness of that January night? To outward eyes she remained obedient, her lips forming the sacred phrases, but within her the fear expanded, pressing against her chest like a secret too dangerous to speak. It was then that Mary began to understand what so many others had refused. That afternoon, while sweeping the corridor outside Mother Catherine's office, Sister Mary stumbled upon a revelation so terrible it nearly stopped her breath. The heavy oak door had not been fully closed, and voices drifted clearly into the hallway, carrying words never meant for innocent ears. She froze, the dust brush falling still in her hand, as Sister Elizabeth spoke first. Gone was the warm, maternal tone that usually comforted orphans and novices alike. What Mary heard instead was cold, calculating, alien. "The doctor says this one will fetch a higher price." A chill ran through Mary's veins, and she pressed closer, scarcely daring to breathe. Elizabeth continued. "He says men pay extra for the innocent ones." Before Mary could process the horror, Sister Margaret's sharp voice entered the exchange. accompanied by the faint clink of glass vials as though she were sorting her medicines even while discussing such monstrous matters. We need to be more careful with the timing. 3 in 1 month raises questions. The bishop's secretary mentioned it in his last letter. The conversation paused briefly, then Mother Catherine's low, dismissive laugh rolled through the crack in the door, sinking into Mary's bones like ice water. The bishop is easily managed. Another donation to his cathedral fund, and his questions will disappear. Besides, we've established the pattern well enough. No one questions nuns being sent to frontier missions or succumbing to illness during their charitable work. Mary's heart pounded as if it might burst from her chest. But worse still was what followed. Margaret's voice dropped, grave and suspicious. What about the Collins girl? She watches too closely. I've seen her listening at doors. The silence that followed stretched long enough for Mary to feel her pulse in her ears, terror blooming as she realized they spoke of her. Finally, Catherine's voice returned, steady and confident. We'll wait. She's too plain to fetch much and she has tea. What had happened to her missing sisters? What terrible fate had befallen Sister Rebecca just the night before? And who exactly was this doctor whose name surfaced like a dark omen in whispered conspiracies? The fragments in Sister Mary's mind began to align into a dreadful picture, one she wished with all her soul she could unsee. The missing nuns were always the youngest and most beautiful, chosen as though from some twisted ledger. The visits of wealthy benefactors, men in tailored coats and polished boots, who walked the convent halls under Mother Catherine's watchful eye suddenly took on sinister meaning. The muffled noises heard late at night from the locked north wing, the section of the convent none but Catherine and her closest confidants ever entered, no longer seemed the workings of imagination. And the prosperity of St. Mary's, the constant renovations, the fine new vestments, the generous donations to the bishop, how could such abundance be reconciled with their supposed vow of poverty? The patterns of secrecy, wealth, and disappearance coiled together like a serpent tightening around her conscience. After a sleepless night of prayer, whispered Hail Marys clutched desperately between trembling fingers, and hours of pacing on the cold stone floor, Sister Mary resolved to act. She knew that silence was complicity, and though fear pressed heavy on her chest, she could not endure another night haunted by the cries of the lost. The opportunity came with her weekly duty of collecting eggs from the chicken coop, the one small mercy where she was permitted outside the convent walls without a companion. It was here, in the quiet of morning, with frost on the ground and her heart pounding in her throat, that she slipped a folded scrap of paper, written hastily by candlelight, into the pocket of Jimmy Fletcher, the young farm boy who came each dawn with his father's milk delivery. Barely 12 years old, with wide innocent eyes, Jimmy often lingered shyly by the Paragraph 1. In the forgotten archives of the Wisconsin Diocese there exists a collection of documents that the Catholic Church has attempted to bury for over 160 years. These papers detail the systematic disappearance of 23 nuns from St. Mary's Convent near Lake Michigan between 1854 and 1862. Church officials have dismissed these records as administrative errors and misinterpretations, but the testimony of 3 separate diocesan inspectors, along with a cache of private correspondence recently discovered in a sealed wall cavity during renovations, tells a story so horrific that even hardened historians have questioned whether such evil could truly exist within hallowed walls. What follows is the first comprehensive account of what many consider to be the most disturbing case of religious corruption in American history, a case that the Catholic Church has spent a fortune ensuring you would never hear. Before continuing with the story of St. Mary's Convent, the narrator pauses to urge the audience that if they find this tale already unsettling, they should subscribe for more historically accurate accounts of America's darkest religious secrets. With that, we are transported back to the Wisconsin countryside of 1854, where our story begins. Paragraph 2. The morning fog hung heavy over Lake Michigan as Bishop William Corder's carriage rolled through the gates of what would become St. Mary's Convent. The Catholic Church had purchased the sprawling estate, a former lumber baron's mansion surrounded by 30 acres of dense woodland, with the intention of establishing the first major Catholic institution in the largely Protestant Wisconsin territory. This strategic expansion was part of a broader push to establish Catholic influence in America's rapidly developing frontier regions, where Protestant denominations were gaining significant footholds. The limestone mansion with its 3 imposing wings and bell tower stood in stark contrast to the humble wooden churches that dotted the Wisconsin landscape. The central building, constructed in 1842, featured Gothic arches and narrow windows that seemed to watch like eyes over the surrounding countryside. 2 wings extended from either side. The east wing intended for the nuns' quarters, the west for the proposed orphanage and infirmary. Behind the main structure stood a small chapel, its spire rising above the treetops and visible from miles away across the flat Wisconsin plains. Paragraph 3. Local Protestant families viewed the arriving nuns with suspicion, their black habits and Irish accents marking them as outsiders in a community dominated by German and Scandinavian settlers. The region's residents, primarily Lutheran and Methodist, had grown accustomed to the simple democratic structure of their own religious communities. The hierarchical nature of Catholicism, with its rituals and secrets, felt foreign and threatening. On the day of the convent's consecration, a small crowd gathered outside the gates. "Papists," muttered Elijah Hoffman, a respected elder at the local Lutheran church, as he watched the black-robed figures process into the chapel. "They'll bring their foreign ways here, corrupt our children with their idolatry." His companion, Wilhelm Schmidt, nodded grimly. "My grandfather fled Germany to escape the Catholics' persecution. Now they follow us even here." This sentiment, though not universal, reflected the deep religious tensions that would form the backdrop for the tragedy to come. Inside the chapel, Bishop Corder addressed the small gathering of clergy and dignitaries. "St. Mary's will serve as a beacon of God's mercy in this wilderness," he declared. His voice echoed against the stone walls and filtered through simple stained glass windows, casting colored light across the pews.